Thank you so much for joining the session today on unconscious bias training. What we'll do is we'll start off with some introductions. So I'll start with myself. I'm Sarvat Bhatti. I work in the assessment assurance function in digital in an organization. Debbie, over to you.
Hello there. My name is Debbie Neal, and I'm an assessor.
Thank you, Debbie. Chad, over to you.
Hi there, my name's Chad Bond. I help low-income countries understand the power of digital transformation.
Thank you so much to both of you for joining the session and your introduction. So before we proceed, I'm sure you've all heard of the term unconscious bias. Is that right? And have you undertaken any unconscious bias training before?
Yes, I have. We have a within the organisation I work for.
Have you undergone any unconscious bias training previously?
Thank you, Sarah. I've gone through several versions of unconscious bias training. I think throughout my career in 3 different organisations, it's always good and healthy to keep it at the forefront of your mind.
Absolutely. So like I mentioned to Debbie, the purpose of this training is to give you that reminder of unconscious bias training. Sometimes we all have unconscious biases and how we can kind of identify them and eradicate them as we go along. Is there any dokie? So we've all heard of unconscious bias, undergone training. Can you think of in your own time, in 2 minutes, if you can think of a couple of words that you can think of are synonymous to unconscious bias? For example, it could be prejudice or what words have you come up with?
The word that comes to my mind quite a bit is bullying or isolation.
Good. Why have you thought of these words that in relation to unconscious bias?
I think in all the instances, actual tangible examples of unconscious bias have been realised, have been whether myself or those that have been managing raised instances that had those 2 words quite firmly in every sentence.
Absolutely. And sometimes what we don't realise is that our unconscious biases can have that impact on others. So, you know, again, we should be really careful of those. Debbie, what words have you thought of that are synonymous to unconscious bias?
I pulled out quite several. I think the one at the top of the list is ignorance, maybe.
Very good, a very relevant word, because even though a lot of people have unconscious biases, our biases are formed when we're younger based on our beliefs, and those are a result of our environment, our upbringing, and it's not always our fault. But later on, we'll kind of discuss how we can identify those and how we can overcome those. But no, good. Thank you so much. So next, on the next slide, I have a video that I'm going to share about unconscious bias. A lot of the information in this video, I'm sure you're aware of. But like I said, it's a reminder, so it'll help you in kind of thinking about what it is and how we can kind of deal with it.
It can process vastly more information than our conscious mind by using shortcuts based on our background, cultural environment, and personal experiences to make almost instantaneous decisions about everything around us. The snag is, it's wrong quite a lot of the time, especially on matters that need rational thinking. Here's a classic example. A bat and a ball cost £1 10 pence. If the bat costs £1 more than the ball, how much does the ball cost? Most people, including over 50% of students at some of the world's leading universities, get the answer wrong and say 10 pence. The answer is actually 5 pence. Many of us choose 10 pence without thinking. This is because our unconscious mind uses instinct, not analysis. So our unconscious is fallible. It's also biased. It makes snap judgments of people we meet, categorizing them according to gender, social and other characteristics. In milliseconds, we judge whether somebody is like us and belongs to our in-group. These are the people we favour. So men might favour men, while women might favour women. However, we can belong to different in-groups, and we like to be part of an in-group that's powerful, which could mean a woman favouring a man over a woman. That's unconscious bias. All of us have it, and it colours our decisions without our realising. For example, research reveals that if I were a man, you would be more likely to be nodding in agreement right now, because people pay more attention to a male voice. The Royal Society fosters excellence in science, but this can only be achieved if we select from the widest range of talent. And that's not possible if unconscious bias is narrowing down the field for non-scientific reasons. To lessen the impact of unconscious bias, which is easier for us to notice in others, we are raising the awareness of unconscious bias to members of our selection and appointment panels. We're encouraging panel members to deliberately slow down decision-making, reconsider reasons for decisions, question cultural stereotypes, and monitor each other for unconscious bias. We can't cure unconscious bias, but with self-awareness, we can address it.
Great. What were initial thoughts about this video?
I thought there were some good messages coming through about how we think about things,
Mhm.
how we jump to conclusion about things without due consideration.
Absolutely. And it's just about having that kind of like self-awareness of, like they mentioned at the end, of all the biases that we have, because we can't completely eradicate them. Chad?
But I was reflecting on the age of the video. In one hand, a bias of my own for applying on the video in terms of the language and the graphics it used, which led me on to my second thought about a lot of the biased categories that were charted before are also something that probably needs to be continually updated as well, because we've probably developed more biases living in the digital age throughout the pandemic, for example, in terms of our processes, how we approach and what we think of people and groups of people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, especially in pandemic, one of the, oh, sorry, Debbie, you raised your hand. You're on mute, sorry, Debbie.
What things result in behaviours and how those behaviours can manifest themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just that point about a male head
Yeah.
nodding, it's just
Yeah, that's
a minor
sometimes
thing.
absolutely. And I think it's one of those points, like, I mean, similar to what both of you have mentioned as well. I mean, about around pandemic, just before pandemic, a lot of companies couldn't, didn't have that trust in their employees. The second point that I on the slide, again, we've had good discussions around unconscious bias. Can you think of an unconscious bias that people hold? So, for example, like myself, I grew up in Pakistan, where collective view was that, females cannot be independent. Is there any unconscious bias that you've heard of or, seen take place in front of you, which you can definitely recall as a bias and an unconscious bias, which with negative impact?
I grew up in the east of London, so quite a diverse, multicultural area, and I think that the groups of friends that I integrated with were also of that reflection. But I think, like, for myself growing up and also witnessing the way groups were treated, linked to racial biases was immediately obvious, for example.
Leadership positions for women and maybe other groups as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's data around, it's improving, but there's still data around that, especially in organizations that we work in, that, it's mostly dominated by, the senior leadership is mostly dominated by males, and the gaps closing a little bit, but there's still a lot more work that needs to be done. Thanks for that.
I think also yeah,
Okie dokie. So the next slide is, again, a little bit of reflection from the video and discussions that we've had. So not all unconscious biases are bad. Like Debbie mentioned earlier, that some are a result of ignorance, some are some of our mental shortcuts or unconscious biases keep us safe. For example, we know that lion is a dangerous animal, and if a lion just walks in, so an instinct would be to run. Probably not the right one, because we should stay put, but our running away would be a reflection that we are scared and it's a dangerous animal. So that unconscious bias is not bad. So not all unconscious biases are bad, but it's also always important to question them, because our brain processes about 11 million bits of information within a minute, but we can only consciously process 50 bits. So a lot of the decisions that we make are unconscious. So for example, brushing teeth, taking your dog for a walk. Also, before pandemic, when we used to go into the office 5 days a week, a lot of the decisions that we made were unconscious. But obviously, I don't know if you guys noticed, after the first day, after 2 years of working from home, going back in the office, it's probably harder to get back in the routine. And now that we've started going back, it's a little bit easier. Also, mentioned mental shortcuts. It's really important to have those. And we have like different categories, or like we're brushing our teeth, or we are brushing a hair. Those all fall under different categories. And obviously, Debbie, you mentioned earlier that our biases inform our behavior, regardless of whether they're good or bad. Also, there are different kinds of biases. So we've got affinity bias, where we favor somebody that we like, regardless of what's actually happened or what they have done. Confirmation bias is when we look for information that confirms our beliefs, our biases. For example, if we believe a particular news, we will start seeking that news everywhere. And it doesn't help when, because of the algorithms on our phone and our social media or technology, plays on that. So if, for example, we are looking for a particular news, it'll just keep bringing the same one and confirming our view. And then you've got the halo bias, for example, to one attribute or characteristic overshadows everything else. So for example, recruiters may prefer a candidate from one particular place, ignoring everything else. Some other examples are race bias, so not acknowledging the difference and making comments like, I'm not racist because I don't see color. Acknowledging that, yes, you see color and you do celebrate that difference is what we should achieve and aim towards. Then you've got financial bias, assuming that everyone is in the same position or status as us. So for example, if there's a leaving due present or a birthday present, then you ask for the same amount of contribution, not really considering that the other person may not be able to contribute the same amount. Then you've got the age bias, thinking that an older person is more experienced or a younger person is not knowledgeable enough, or any other bias related to that. And then, of course, gender biases that you mentioned as well. We make like too many assumptions, too many biases against each gender. Are there any comments on the biases that we've just mentioned, or are you happy to kind of move on to the next slide? So the next one is a poll. So Google Meet does not allow us to do that directly. So if you can just use the QR code, or I'm going to put the link on the chat bar so you can copy that and use that poll to answer the question. In your career, what biases have you been subjected to or witnessed? So we've got a few: race, financial, age, gender, or other. So I'll put the link in the screen, and I would appreciate if you can just do a vote for that. Okay. Just waiting for Debbie to come back. Back, perfect. Can you see my screen with the results?
Yep, that's correct.
Yes.
Perfect. Would you like to say a little bit about it? If only if you're comfortable.
I think with the
Yeah.
other that I had thinking about
Yeah.
was, it seemed to me, I think for progression, maybe in progression in a job some years ago, it was more of a, I wasn't considered because.
I think that sometimes the processes are again designed by humans, aren't they? And humans, again, who are not aware of the unconscious bias, can design processes which sometimes hinder progression of people, that where you've kind of just identified that you've reflected where there could be your bias, but then you reflected that actually no, I did, even if you thought it was your own bias, you spoke to others, you got their view to help you with your self-awareness. And that proved your point that the process ultimately was biased. Yeah, Chad, were you going to add something to that?
The usual dichotomy in the tech sector is experience versus competence.
Absolutely. It's an age bias, isn't it? It could be against people who are older, more experienced, or younger. It could be both. That kind of leads us comfortably to our next bit, our last point about how we can combat unconscious bias. So I'll go through some of the points. So it's not limited to just these points. So please think about some that some techniques or tools that you use to combat your own unconscious bias. But some of the stuff that I've got here is, being aware of it. So that's the first step. Just be aware of having unconscious bias, because I've heard from a lot of people that I don't have unconscious bias, which is humanly impossible. What those biases are, is it against a particular gender or a race? Ask yourself, are these the right ones? Are they healthy? Are they conducive for me or others? Decision making also should be informed, again, like Debbie, on your point around recruitment process. Just reflect whether the decisions that are being made, are they informed, well-rounded? Are we giving the right people the chance? Again, protected characteristics, do we have any biases against them? Also, learn more about others. That's one way of doing it, broadening our horizons, learning about others, and also not making assumptions, but also calling out if others are making assumptions, if others have those biases, instead of just keeping quiet because that does not, because maybe that person's not aware, maybe we're not educating them. And also, if be aware that we all have unconscious biases, we all make mistakes, just apologize, learn, and change. That's key. Are there any other biases, other ways that you can in the past have combated unconscious bias or plan to, that you'd like to share with us?
I would reflect that the second and third points are most relevant to myself. I'm not sure if it's a point, more of a technique, but I often have a conversation with myself in my head because I'm thinking or wanted to say something that's perhaps not appropriate or wrong or permeated with a bias, for example. So trying to have self-awareness, I suppose, at the right time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. Thank you. Very important.
Yeah.
Debbie?
And I think for me, the fourth point, decision making should be informed. I think it's always,
as well, didn't you, that taller people are probably
better than
better than you could be, and you obviously prove them wrong, through practice and perseverance. So for me, I think fourth is the fourth one is quite important, something that I need to work on myself, because we all have unconscious biases. I tend to be quite reactive, and the fourth point requires a bit more reflection and react. And when you're reactive, you are heavily relying on your unconscious biases. So again, a point for me to work on and me to, like, think about more. And now we've come on to the last session, the last slide, and it is a short quiz for you guys. So what is another word of unconscious bias? A, conscious bias, B, implicit bias, or C, harassment. So if you don't have, you can raise your hand or shout out or put it in the chat bar. It's up to you.
It's not C. So I was thinking A or B.
Yeah.
If it's unconscious, then it wouldn't be unconscious.